Hey, welcome to the Ramsey Paul Show. It is Monday, December 8th. I hope you all had a great weekend. And as always, if you want to leave a tip, one of the ways you can do it is powerchat.live, Ramsey Paul. And if you have a question, I'll answer your question on air. And I always like real mail. And you can write me up, Paul Ramsey, P.O. Box 8093, Fayetteville, Arkansas, 72703. And as always, I encourage people to join my Substack. Every Tuesday night, we have a roundtable. You can find me on substack.com, Ramsey Paul. All right. All right. Let's get into the stories here. We had an interesting document that was released by Donald Trump and the White House. And we have the New York Times kvetching about it. This is a national security document. I think they come out with this on a regular basis. Other administrations have done this too. It basically outlines the administration's view of foreign policy around the world. And they're kind of boilerplate. They're basically generic, usually. It's about, oh, we want peace and democracy, that type of stuff, our values, whatever that is. But this time it was quite different. And we'll get into this a little bit. But as you see, the New York Times here saying Trump has long disdained Europe's elites. Now it's official. A new White House policy document formalizes the President Trump's long held contempt for European leaders. Well, they deserve contempt, I tell you that. It made clear that the continent now stands at a strategic crossroads. And let me just show you something else about this here. There was a kind of a post that went over this more in detail. And it says, bring this up right here. This was Simplicus, erasure of compatible values. Trump's new national security strategy recast Europe as a strategic liability. And this was kind of shocking because it's always assumed that there was something called the West, the collective West in the world. And that include countries like Britain, Germany, France, Italy, most of Western Europe, and some of Eastern Europe now. And then countries such as Australia, Canada, and the United States. And since the World War II, it was always assumed that the United States, yeah, it was kind of the head of that coalition, but the other countries were partners too. And we all basically held the same type of values, meaning a democratic system where we respect people's right of free speech, right to worship as they choose, those type of things. And again, countries had different tweaks on that, but it was all basically the same. That's how we differed from like the Soviet Union and the Iron Curtain. Those people weren't free. We are free people. And we had organizations like NATO. Again, the United States mostly funded it and ran it, but it was for a lot of other nations too. But this is the first time in a document where the United States is saying, well, wait a minute, this is not necessarily true anymore. Specifically, Europe. Europe is going through a huge transformation. I know I'm sounding like Barbara Specter, and it was her and her kind that did this. Europe is going through multicultural mode, and it is. So, what has happened over the past decades is Europe has decided to replace its native people for a variety of reasons, and they blame it on global warming or because of refugees or whatever. But the goal is to make sure there are no longer any white countries because Barbara Specter and her tribe thinks that white countries are dangerous to them, so they got to break them up. So this hasn't been happening on accident. This migration has been intentional. So in Europe, in pretty much all European countries, except for a couple, they've been flooding their countries with Africans and Muslims, people that aren't compatible with Western values. And they've been able to try to implement this because a lot of the native people have objected. But in Europe, if you object to that, you go to prison, especially in countries such as Britain. So if you say, no, I don't want Africans or Muslims moving into England, this should be our homeland. It's not like I hate Muslims or Africans, but they have their homelands. They need to fix it. We have a right to our homeland. We've had this homeland for thousands of years. This is our land, our island. But if you say something like that in Britain, you will literally go to jail. And it's got so extreme in Britain that, of course, there was a one famous case. This lady was raped by an immigrant, and the immigrant got no jail time. I think he got community service. But in her private text message to her friend, she called him a disgusting faggot or something. And because of that, she went to prison. And something similar happened in Germany. A victim of a gang rape by these savages they imported. She later called them disgusting pigs. And again, they didn't go to jail, but she did. So the European elite is waging war on the European people. And, I don't know if they really believe in it or they're being paid off, but that's the goal. I'm talking people like Mertz in Germany, Starmer in Britain, Macron in France, and then you have the EU, which is basically a totalitarian organization that tries to suppress free speech. You can have free speech as long as they agree with it. That's what their definition of free speech is. So it's a really bad situation now. And in this policy paper that the Trump White House put together and Trump signed off on it, he did the preface to this policy paper. They're basically saying we can't really count on Europe being European anymore. And they're not going to necessarily share our values. In fact, they already don't share our values. If you look at, for example, people being thrown into jail because of their speech, it's like something like 10,000 British people were last year in Britain. And in Russia, we always say how evil the Russians are. Oh, they're a totalitarian state, which they're not. But they had like a total of 400 people thrown into prison. So it's not even on the same scale. It's really sad what's happening in Britain. And the policy paper said basically what I've said: if you replace the people, even though it's the same dirt and the same territory, it's no longer the same nation, because a nation is not the dirt. It's not a geographic location. It's the blood, people that are related by blood. And part of people, when they're related by blood, they have certain values, they have a certain intelligence, they have a certain world outlook. And a lot of it's not because of the environment, it's because of genetics. Just like I said many times, if you replaced everyone in Japan with Haitians, Japan, even though the island would still exist there, and you could call it Japan and Tokyo, but if you have a bunch of Haitians there, it's no longer really Japanese. It's a different country. And it would take the characteristics of Haiti. It'd be very violent, poor, warlords. That's what would happen in Japan, because people make the difference. And it seems like the Trump administration is really understanding this. Like, hey, if we replaced everyone in Britain with Africans and Muslims, within a few decades, it's no longer Britain anymore. It's just some island that doesn't have Western values. And so the Trump White House said, if this doesn't stop in Britain and in other countries like France and Germany, you won't have the French anymore. You won't have the Germans. You won't have the British. You won't have Swedes. They will basically have been genocide because of this migration. And this is deliberate. And they will have the characteristics of the people where the people came from. And we're already seeing that. We don't have to imagine this. This is happening. And so the policy paper said, we can't really count on Europe anymore unless they change their policy with immigration and they embrace leadership that protects the European people that share our values. And then plus, happening in all this situation is Europe economically is declining for a variety of reasons. They're very bureaucratic. The EU stifles creativity. They've embraced this whole global warming hoax. And so they have this green energy bullshit, which is deindustrializing most of Europe, like Germany. It's just really crazy, but they can't do manufacturing anymore. It's all going into China. So even if you believed in global warming, it doesn't help punishing Europe because the biggest culprits are like India and China. It's not Germany or France, but it doesn't matter. So they're becoming more poor and they're losing their native population. They're losing their IQ, their creativity, and they're losing their freedoms. They're becoming totalitarian. And this was set out by the Trump administration, said, we can't necessarily count on Europe anymore. And they're becoming and they're in decline. Europe used to always be the powerhouse of the world, but no more because of these policies. So it was interesting. It's created a lot of controversy, but obviously part of that is too is in this paper said we can't get involved with all these wars that Europe is trying to do, and what they mean with that is with Russia. So an interesting thing is happening as Europe is declining. The people are being replaced. Their women are being raped by immigrants, and if you complain, they throw you in prison. Their standard of living is falling. When all of this is happening, these EU elites, instead of taking responsibility, they're blaming Putin and Russia, which is crazy, but that's what they do. It's a typical thing. You blame an outside enemy for your internal problems. So they focus on Russia, and that's the big boogeyman, and they refuse to negotiate with Russia, and they get in all these proxy wars that we have in Ukraine, for example. And that's why the Europeans are implacable. They're not willing to negotiate. They want to keep Europeans or the Ukrainians fighting to the last Ukrainian until pretty much all the Ukrainian men are eliminated. And they're okay with that because they want to have this perpetual enemy in Russia. And this paper says, no, what we need to do is stabilize relations with Russia. Whatever you want to say about Russia, they're not replacing their people. If you should be in Russia and you should be raped by someone and you complain about it, they're not going to throw the woman in jail like you will in Britain. So in many ways, Russia could be a more stable partner for us. But the document goes on with a lot of other issues. It kind of revives the Monroe Doctrine, meaning we as the United States should be primarily focused on our country first. That's what we should be. But then also the secondary is like North America and South America. This is our sphere of influence. We shouldn't worry so much what's happening halfway around the world. We shouldn't be the world's policeman. So whatever you think about Ukraine, that shouldn't be our business. We're not the world's policeman. We don't have the endless amount of money to fund these wars. We don't. We have a limited capacity. We no longer have the industrial base to make unlimited weapons. We have multiple potential enemies. We can't give an unlimited supply to Ukraine or money. We have a huge deficit. And with Ukraine, a lot of it's gone to corruption. They're having a lot of corruption scandals there. We got to cut that off. And if the Ukraine wants to fight the war with Europe, God bless them, let them do it. But we need to get out of it. So that seems to be the focus there. And the other thing they brought up is they want to get out of the Middle East, have less of a focus there. And that, of course, that's going to be a huge one because when they say the Middle East, obviously what they mean is we're controlled by Israel and fight Israel's enemies. And that's going to be a tough one because even Republicans like Ted Cruz and Tom Cotton, Lindsey Graham, they put Israel before America. So I don't think they're going to go with that idea. And then they look at primarily our biggest adversary for the United States is not going to be Russia, it's going to be China. And I'm not saying I agree with that, but that's what this paper dictates. So it's basically saying we don't have unlimited resources to fight all these wars around the world. We need to focus on America and our sphere in North and South America. And what weapons we do have in the military, we need to focus on China because they're the biggest threats. We don't need to really focus on Russia. We can get along with them. And we need to stop giving help and welfare to Europe because Europe quickly is no longer sharing our values because the European people are being replaced by people that don't have those values. So it was interesting. This has created a huge uproar within Europe and a little bit in America with the elites. This is good to see, though, and I'm glad Trump put this out. Okay, the second story here, and let me just get this out up here. This had to do with a incident in a Cinnabon girl, and let me just show you this here. And so what happened? This girl here was being harassed by these Somalis, and this is in Minnesota. That again in the 1970s was almost 100% white, but various groups like Soros and other groups decided to place Somalis who, as even among Africans, which have a low IQ, they're one of the lowest. Plus, they tend to be Muslim, very violent. Somalia doesn't really have a functioning government or a waste management system, extremely violent. We brought those people over here. And what happened is they were harassing this blonde girl working at a Cinnabon. I feel sorry for her having to work in that environment. And they were calling her a whore because she wasn't wearing a hijab. So in America, a girl working in Minneapolis was called a whore by the Somalis because she wasn't attired in the Muslim garb. So she just freaked out. She said, I don't give a fuck if you're filming me. And she used some naughty words saying, yeah, I'm fine. I'm racist. I don't want you people around. And of course, she got fired. But it just shows how people are really getting tired of this. She shouldn't have to be in this environment. These Somalis, they should not be in the United States. And they need to go back. I don't care if they're legal or illegal. They're not compatible with our country. And they always argue because Donald Trump called Somalia garbage. I agree with that. No, it's a wonderful land. Well, okay, then you go back to your wonderful land and stay there. You don't have to be in our country. Go back to your wonderful country of warlords and whatever. And you can hassle the women there. Do not do it here in our country. So this is how the tensions are building up here and people are reaching their breaking point. So that was the number 2 story. And then we had some stories about the ongoing saga in Ukraine. And it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. But we have, here we go. Our sources have revealed that Witkoff has put forward a series of demands to Zelensky, which he must fulfill before meeting Trump. So Trump is getting tired of meeting with Zelensky. Zelensky's already in a lot of problems because his government has shown to be a lot of corruption. So a lot of our tax money that went to Ukraine has gone to these corrupt oligarchs. They've had like gold-plated toilets, build mansions. It's been embezzled. And it's really sad because most people in Ukraine are very poor, but the money we sent over there to provide for the defense, a lot of it, not all of it, but a lot of it was stolen. And Trump is losing his patience with Zelensky. And we can see this right here, with his frustration with Zelensky. And let me just take a look here.
What's your next step in Russia-Ukraine talks after last week's negotiations?
So we've been speaking to President Putin, and we've been speaking to Ukrainian leaders, including Zelensky.
This is an interesting way he phrases it. So he's been speaking to Putin, then he's been speaking to Ukrainian leaders, including Zelensky. So that there's a lot of rumors that there may be a political coup in Ukraine and Zelensky will be forced out and they'll put some other Ukrainian in. I don't know. There's been some unfavorable articles about Zelensky and his corruption. Even in the Western media, they used to always try to protect him. So they may just want a new face there. Just as a reminder, Zelensky is a dictator. His presidential term expired and they're supposed to have elections, but he canceled the elections and pretty much his secret police arrest opposition, political opposition. So don't think that Ukraine is a democracy, it's a dictatorship.
President Zelensky. And I have to say that I'm a little bit disappointed that President Zelensky hasn't yet read the proposal. That was as of a few hours ago.
So we have the proposal. Witkoff went to Russia with a proposal, and it was a 28-point peace plan, basically. It wasn't a formal agreement. It was just some talking points about how can we end the war. And some of the talking points were basically the 4 provinces, the 4 eastern provinces, that includes Donbass, will be given to Russia because Russia claims it's really their territory. And Crimea, which Russia has historically, that will be recognized as Russian. Ukraine will promise not to go into NATO because right now in the Ukrainian constitution, they said they're going to go to NATO. And that creates a problem with Russia. They want Ukraine to be neutral, not part of NATO. And they don't want foreign troops in Ukraine. So part of the agreement was, okay, Ukraine promises not to become part of NATO. They do not bring foreign troops in like the French or the Americans. They don't put American missiles in Ukraine. And then they reduce the size of their army. So if they did those points, and there's a few other points, but those are the big ones, then Russia would agree to a peace. Because despite the propaganda, Russia had no desire to take over all of Ukraine. They never did. Because early, I think it was February or March of 2022 when Russia invaded. Remember, they initially put troops around Kiev, and it wasn't a lot of troops. It was a token force, and it kind of spooked the Ukrainians. And they had negotiations with the Russians in March in Istanbul. And Russia said, hey, we don't want all of Ukraine, but we want you to recognize the Donbass area as our territory. And the Ukrainians at the time, they actually initialed off on the agreement. But when they got back to Kiev, Biden sent Boris Johnson to Ukraine to invalidate that agreement. They're like, no, we want to fight Russia. And here's the thing, if we put these sanctions on Russia, Russia will fall because they're a weak nation. Now, that didn't happen, but that was the idea. And so since then, we've been having this 4-year-long war where Russia has been slowly advancing in the east. Although this year, the rate of their advance has really accelerated. It looks like the Ukrainian army is starting to break because they just don't have any men anymore. And they're running out of weapons and manufacturing. They don't have the ability to keep up with the drone production or artillery production that the Russians do. And we as the United States can't even keep up with it. Even if we just had to worry about Ukraine, we couldn't keep up with it because we're no longer a manufacturing power. We've outsourced that a lot to China. But we also have to worry about Iran, Venezuela, China. So we can't put all our eggs into one basket of Ukraine. So this is creating the problem. And Europe, they're good at arresting women that complain about getting raped by African immigrants. They're good about that, but they don't really have any armies to help fight against the Russians. They talk tough, but they can't back it up. They're weak. They're all very weak. Europe's a very weak continent now. So they are weak people that talk a lot of shit. And that's probably not a good idea, but that's what they're doing. So if the United States is not involved with this, Ukraine will probably fall. So they had their initial treaty negotiations, and it looks like Zelensky hasn't even read it. Probably because the Europeans are really pushing Zelensky not to agree to anything. And the Russians, they don't really care because they said, okay, we don't really care. We're happy to have a peace agreement. If not, that's okay with us. We are going to have all these, the 4 provinces, the Russians are going to get one way or the other, either through a peace agreement or through the battlefield. And they're waiting on the battlefield so they could get it that way. So either way, they're going to get it. It's just with the peace agreement, you save some lives. But again, the Europeans are saying, no, don't compromise. And Zelensky, I don't think he wants to compromise. And Zelensky's created a lot of problems for the Ukrainian troops kind of reminiscent of some Hitler did in the war, where Zelensky, sometimes troops were about to be surrounded, and the wise thing to do from a military point of view is to retreat so you can reset your defenses. But Zelensky's like, no, we can't retreat an inch. So he's kept a lot of thousands of troops of Ukrainians, sadly, have been cut off by the Russians, including now Minograd, I think it is. A couple thousand troops are surrounded, and they're either going to have to surrender or they're going to be killed by the Russians, all because Zelensky butts in with his generals and doesn't allow them to retreat. So it's a bad situation. But I don't think Zelensky worries too much, because even if the Russians should eventually get to Kiev, Zelensky, he's got a lot of money he's got from you guys, the taxpayers, and he will flee to probably Israel, and he'll have all your money.
His people love it, but he hasn't. Russia's fine with it. Russia, I guess, would rather have the whole country when you think of it. But Russia is, I believe, fine with it. But
yeah, Russia didn't say the 28 talking points, to be clear, Russia or Putin didn't say they're fine with it. They said this is something we can work with. And a 28 points is not a formal agreement. Russia's position is, okay, we can start from this, but what we got to do proper negotiations, which is actually you have meetings, you have agendas, you go through it point by point, and you put it in and you discuss the points. And so it's the start of the process. That's what Russia has said. Now, Ukraine is not willing to do that. So this is part of the problem right now.
I'm not sure that Zelensky is fine with it. His people love it.
And this is strange that Trump says Zelensky's people love it, which I doubt, because I haven't seen many Ukrainians at least saying, yeah, we want to give up this territory to Russia, and that's what this would be. It's interesting he says this, and this is why I'm almost looking for a coup to happen in Ukraine, where we get rid of Zelensky and put someone else in that's more receptive to the negotiations.
But he hasn't read it. So someday you'll explain that one to me, Jeff.
So Trump is saying that Zelensky hasn't even read the proposal yet. I don't know if that's true or not, but you could tell that Trump is being very frustrated with that. All right. One last story to show the evil of the EU and how the EU needs to be dismantled is what's happening to a country I used to live in, Hungary. And Hungary, they've been one of the rare countries in in Europe, and it's led by Viktor Orban. And what it is, the EU is fining Hungary because Hungary hasn't taken in all these third world immigrants, because the Hungarian position is Hungary's for Hungarian people. It's not for a bunch of Somalis or Pakistanis. They have their homeland. This is a Christian nation. We don't want to take in these people. We'll help them and everything, but we won't take them in. And the EU, their whole purpose of the EU is to destroy the white European population. And the best way to do that is by flooding these people in. It's kind of a biological warfare. Now, Hungary has refused to do that. So the EU is now fining Hungary. What should happen is that Hungary should get out of the EU. And Elon Musk actually responded to this. He said, dissolve the EU and return power to the people. That is what should happen in Europe. The EU should be disbanded, get rid of that girl boss Ursula, and have each country can make its own immigration policy. So Germany should be run by the German people. Britain should be run by the British people. The EU shouldn't be involved at all. And as we've seen, the EU doesn't respect basic democratic values like free speech or anything like that. So hopefully we'll see some changes there. Anyway, guys, that's the update for today. And as always, if you like the show, be sure to like us, subscribe, and share it with your friends. YouTube doesn't share my stuff because of the algorithm, so I rely upon you. So again, thank you so much for being here, and I'll talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.